Just getting set up here. Today, we're going to talk about love and relationships and healing our attachment styles. So, come on in, tell us where you're joining from, say hello. Oh, thank you. How's everything going? Did you get your commercial space? We're here on TikTok and YouTube. So, welcome. How's everybody's Monday? Did y'all have a good Monday? You've been moving? Oh, good. Well, it's a good time to start. Everything's going back to normal. Like we just got out of retrograde. Eclipses are done. We're in this powerful full moon. This, I think Friday, we're going to have a powerful full moon of completion. So it's a good time to complete stuff. Hi, Kelly. How are you? I'm doing well. How was your Monday? Oh, hi, April. Well, joining in from Texas. How was your Mother's Day? Happy Mother's Day, everybody. All the mothers. And welcome. So, during the Mercury retrograde, I was going through some old papers and journals and kind of thinking about, things of the past, as our retrogrades often do. And I came across some old journals from when I was a psychology student and from the times, when I was still studying and working with my first teacher. And so I wanted to talk about some foundations today and some things to think about as we go forward, especially for those of you who are in relationships or getting ready to get in relationships or frustrated in relationships, and really all relationships, but particularly if you're in a romantic relationship. Hey, crazy Sergeant. Haven't seen you in a while. How are you? Oh, thanks, April. Yeah, it was good. It rained a lot over here, so it was kind of refreshing. But as I was going through some of my old notes, I was thinking about, a lot of times when I work with people, some of the reasons that they really struggle is because of the foundations. And by foundations, I mean, what was going on in your life from the ages of 0 to 13? Because in the Tonopoali, when you're 0 to 13, that's considered the first stage of your life. And in that first stage of your life, it's the most important stage of your life because it sets up your foundation for the rest of your life and the values that you will hold, the survival, how much survival you have inside of you, ambition, drive. It also is what they say the time of your parents. So from the ages of 0 to 13, you're not responsible for your life. It's your parents' responsibility to set you up the best way they can for your foundation. And so in the Tonopoali and the teachings, it talks a lot about how you're supposed to raise your children from those ages and set them up for what, we call now your destiny. And there's a whole system around it about, how to make the best of those years for your children. And so I wanted to talk about it. And for those of you who are joining in, you can maybe get a pen and paper and think about in your own life, because we're in this full moon. I'm sorry, I keep saying full moon because it feels like a full moon, but it's actually a new moon. And it's a completion. We're completing a cycle. And it's a good time to kind of go back and review and look at and say, oh, okay, what was going on in my life from 0 to 13? And when you have a lot of trauma, sometimes those are the years you don't really remember very well. If you have a lot of early childhood trauma, it's very common for people to tell me, well, I don't even remember before the age of 10, or I don't remember. And so then you have to think about, why don't I remember? there's something that, your subconscious is blocking right there. And it probably has a lot to do with early childhood trauma. And, almost everybody has some form of it, some form of something that happened to them in their childhood, but some people have it more. And then when you get into adulthood, you may find that you struggle more in your relationships. And so like here on TikTok, something that I notice, and sometimes it drives me crazy, but there are people who come into the live and they always ask questions like, is so-and-so going to call me? Is so-and-so going to come home? Is so-and-so, it's like these kind of like very anxious, nervous, needy questions. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is about why is that dynamic happening? And sometimes people call it the narcissist and the empath. That's like more in the spiritual communities, they call it that. But in psychology, they talk about your attachment style and how you love. It's your style of loving. And those are the most common, two common parts, is the avoidant, which we would call like the narcissist. And then the anxious or needy person is what they call like the empath, right? And that sets up a relationship of a push and pull. And that's always those relationships where it's like you're always hitting and missing, because in those relationships, what you're really bound to do is to heal. Your whole destiny with that person is to heal these early childhood traumas. And until you heal these early childhood traumas, you tend to continuously attract that type of dynamic, that type of style, because that's what you grew up in. So I want you to think about, what was the style your parents had? If you grew up in your parents' house, Sandra. Yeah, I know. And, it's probably not the most popular topic. But why I wanted to talk about this today and why I was kind of really diving into this subject again is because I see it so much, especially in the spiritual community. And in the spiritual community, when they go to like a tarot reader or these lives, and it's just asking yes or no, they're not actually getting the healing around why is this relationship so dysfunctional? Why do we not understand each other and we keep hitting and missing and pushing and pulling and getting into toxic relationships? And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, but it's just that mostly when you're in an intimate romantic relationship, those are the ones that are going to trigger you the most. And they're also the ones that have the most opportunity for healing. That's why you get into romantic relationships. After the honeymoon stage, the first stage of a relationship when you're in an intimate relationship is always the googly eye, what do they call it? Puppy love stage. Which we all know and love. And then it's like that. When you've hit the end of the puppy dog stage is when you have your first fight. That's your first trigger. That's like, and then it's like, can you recover from that? And can you grow together? And can you love each other and heal together? Because that's ultimately what you're there to do. And the more dysfunction that you have, the more it's going to show up in a relationship, because the person that you're going to attract is going to be the complete opposite of your style of love. So if you're the needy one, the person you're going to attract is going to be the avoidant one. And if you're the avoidant one, then the person you're going to attract is the needy one. And there's 4 different types, but I'm really going to talk about those 2 types because I see that dynamic the most in relationships. I see so many people, especially here on these apps, and they don't know that. They don't know. And I feel like, it's a public service that people should know these things. And maybe it's not you. Maybe it's somebody in your family or somebody and you're going to recognize it, and then you can help them through it. Because one of the main problems people suffer from in their life is their relationships. And it's a relationship to everything and everyone. Hi, Rachel. You had a job and kept schedule. Oh, well, welcome back. I'm glad you're back. You worked on romantic relationships. Is wonderful. Still 10 years strong. Oh, good. Now the kids are triggering you, right? Sounds like you and your other half, crazy Robert. Crazy Sarge. Diane. I know. We all can relate to this stuff. This is, nothing new under the sun, right? Hey there, Ermi. Hey, Amanda. The kids, yeah. So if it's not your other half, it's your kids. It's the kids. Those darn kids getting in the way. Because that's why we're in relationships and that's why we struggle. And so I want you to think about, like, from the age of 0 to 13, what kind of family did you grow up in? What was the dynamic of the family? That's the first part you have to think about when we're talking about these types of styles. And the first thing I wrote down is values. Like, what were the values in your home? What kind of parents did you have, or single parents, some of you? And what were their values? What did they tell you? Like, work hard, get a job, religious maybe. Think about those foundational things that you were heard a lot in the home, because that's going to become your value system later on. Respect yourself and others. That's a good one. How did your parents reflect that in the home? Like, what values did they set? Like, some value could be, we all eat dinner together. That was a common value for some people. And then for other people, maybe there was really no values. Maybe you're like one of those kids that was left a lot of time alone and, like, neglected. Maybe family was always working, orphan. There's a lot of different situations. So maybe you can't really remember values too. Hello, Allegra. Hello, everybody. Okay. So maybe also, your values, you have to think about. You might think about it. So write it down. What were the values that you grew up in? And then what was the lifestyle? What kind of lifestyle did your parents give, you grow up in? Parents, or sometimes grandparents, or whoever your caretakers were. Did you have siblings? What kind of location was it? Single, married? What was your income level? Oh, thanks for the heart. That's cute. What kind of car did your parents or caretakers drive? What was, the dynamic around the lifestyle? Because everybody has different lifestyles. Some people were born in an apartment. Some people, it's a mansion, like the Prince of, King of England, so everybody has different, right, lifestyle. And some are only children. Some have multiple siblings, everybody has different types. So think about the lifestyle also, because that has a lot to do with, as you get older, and kind of your expectations that are set up early in your life. And then that's the next one, is expectations. What did your parents want from you? What did they see for you? Did they want you to be a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, a stay-at-home mom? Did they even have any expectations? What were you set up to believe that your life was supposed to be like? Because that has a lot to do with your adult relationships too, and how the lifestyle you expect as an adult because of what your parents or caretakers set you up for. And then also early childhood deaths. Did you experience any early childhood deaths that maybe would have dramatically changed something in your family? Because when you experience early childhood death, that definitely sets you up for certain attachment styles when you get older. And it's the science around it is that it's directly correlated with certain ways you feel about abandonment and possibly neglect. So think about where they're, like, grandma, grandpa died, mom, dad, somebody significant in your family that would have died before the age of 13 that was pretty life-changing. And through my research when I was a psychology student, I found out that the most traumatic death for children is pets, even sometimes more than grandma and grandpa. I did a whole study around it, and I actually found that early childhood death around pets was more traumatic than a human for people. And it set up kind of this fear of loss. And that would be the avoidant attachment style. Because when you have a fear of loss, it sets you up to never want to lose. And that comes usually from early childhood experiences with death. And then patterns. What were the patterns in your family's relationship? Some people have a pattern like dad was always leaving or mom was always leaving, especially like, I don't know, maybe somewhere in the 60s, 70s, a lot of women went to go work outside the home. So it was no longer stay at homes mothers. And so that kind of set up a whole generation and generations of what they call latchkey children, where you have that certain time of the day when you come home from school until your parents come home that you don't have anybody, right? And sometimes that can set up certain traumas when you get older. Hello, Gypsy. Hello, everybody. And so those are kind of the things I wanted to start with because those are foundations. And why they're important when we talk about spirituality and shamanism or developing spiritual gifts is that these attachment styles can really set us up for lack of trust, high anxiety, and doubt and confusion. And like I've talked about before, the main thing we're trying to break when we're doing spiritual training is the human mind. Because the human mind actually, what it does is it sabotages your spiritual gift. It sabotages your intuition, because if you can't trust anybody, you're definitely not going to trust yourself. You're not going to trust your intuition. You're not going to trust spirit. And that's the part of the training that if we don't heal those early childhood traumas and understand these concepts and these foundations, then it's really hard to know fact from fiction. And so like when you get a message from spirit, your first inclination is to doubt it, is to not trust it. You'll meet a teacher and you won't trust them because you have these early childhood wounds and these foundations that until you help you clear them and heal them, you're never going to get to what we call security. So see, in the psychology, what they really focus on is that you want to try to get to be secure. And most people, I say in America especially, we didn't grow up with secure family structures. Everybody has something, and usually it's around neglect and abandonment in early childhood. And it could be neglect and abandonment emotionally, physically, spiritually, psychologically. It could be all those things. Mentally, it doesn't have to be like physically gone. It could be emotionally gone, spiritually gone, mentally gone, all those things. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because I see it so prevalent, especially in the spiritual communities, about, having to try to do readings or trying to do spiritual work or trying to develop your spirituality with all of that baggage. And you're too cluttered up. You're too cluttered up. When people are too cluttered up, there's no spirit coming through. And when spirit comes through, it gets blocked through all the clutter. And that's why in the native teachings, we always talk about hollow bones and how you have to become a hollow bone in order to really fully receive the spirit world. Because if you don't, you will always be in a constant flux of, is that right? Is it, is that, and you're kind of afraid of it too, because you're not really trusting yourself. You're not really trusting the information. And it all comes from the foundations that were laid when you were from 0 to 13. And that's why those are critical years. And especially if you're parents to a child between 0 to 13, this is something you really want to think about is, how can I raise my children to be secure in themselves, to trust themselves, to not doubt themselves, to be, both independent, but also interdependent. So instead of independent, because that can happen too, the goal is to be interdependent. That's what Buddha said. Buddha actually gave two really great teachings. He said, the first one was, we are interdependent, means we're never independent and we're never dependent, but we're interdependent, which means that we have to know, that we're all connected. And at some time in your life, you're going to need help from other people. And then at other times in your life, you're going to have to give help to other people. And so it's not a good or bad thing. It's just how life is. So you have to give and you have to receive. And that's what we call reciprocity. But when we have these specific types of attachment styles, we either are too giving or too taking, right? That's that whole empath narcissist dynamic, or what in psychology they call anxious and, avoidant. Those are the two main styles. And of course, the goal is to become the secure attachment style, which is kind of the assertive, confident, courageous, positive, interdependent. Those are the words they describe for secure. But, just think about it. And you don't have to get all triggered up. Because I know sometimes when I talk about the shadow work and this kind of foundational work, it can trigger you because this is not the stuff we talk about a lot. This is not something that is talked about a lot unless maybe you go to therapy or you read it on the internet or you come across something or you study psychology. But usually when we think about relationships and why do we suffer in these patterns of relationships, we're not really thinking about what is my attachment style? Right, something nobody talks about. Why is my partner driving me nuts? Okay. So Ermi says, what if you had a mother that was also learning and her mistakes was her just learning with kids? Yeah, that's exactly what all mothers do. That's why by the time you get to the last kid, you usually have it better. And by the time you get to grandchildren, the parents are much better. That's why grandparents usually are much better than when your parents were, they have some practice. That's how you want to be secure and easy. Yeah. And in order to get to secure and easy, we have to do the internal work. It's work. The problem is when they never apologize for it. Laugh out loud, not our parents. Yeah. Our parents were perfect, right? Yeah. They never apologize for it. No, because so let's say you grew up in a household where you were always criticized, you were always judged. Every time you spoke out loud, you feared judgment. Anybody here grow up in that? Maybe a very critical mother. What's that saying? Kids are supposed to, listen, not be heard, or something like that. There's even a saying where kids are just to be seen, not heard. You can be seen, but not heard, right? So a lot of people grow up in that, where it's especially Asian, Asian families, you don't talk. Seen and not heard, yes. The most critical, but she hated herself and her clothes, so it made sense, yes. Your dad said that all the time, see? And so that would probably set you up to be more of an avoidant personality, because the avoidant personality is the person who is, what we call the ghoster. Have you ever been ghosted? Or maybe you ghosted somebody. The avoidant type of person, because they grew up in an overly critical, negative, household, it develops an attachment style of love that says, oh, it's not safe for me to speak my truth. Yeah, that's your husband, right? I knew it was going to be somebody. Yeah, you're very much an anxious attachment. Yeah, and the anxious attachment would go to the avoidant. This is the person you would attract. And see, this is why when you see in the lives where people come in and they always say, is so-and-so going to call? Is this going to happen? Da, 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 da. It's because the anxious person is now being triggered by the avoidant person, and the avoidant person is being triggered by the anxious person. They are triggering each other's early childhood trauma. And because they're not aware of it, because they're in the trigger, they're not understanding there's a big healing moment right there. Because when you can recognize it and not react to it, and say, oh, okay. And then you start to really understand, okay, that's just, something that I grew up with. That's something that happened to me that now is become part of this pattern. And then you recognize the pattern and then you lean into it. And instead of running away, oh, I don't want to feel that. You have to feel it. That's why you have to feel it. You have to feel it. If you don't feel it, then you're going to just keep, repeating it. You're going to keep repeating it. That's the whole thing, is that if you don't feel it, then it'll just keep going into like a circle. Make sense? Okay. So let's see here. I don't have tarot cards, but thank you, Juliana. What the heck? Okay. So, and that's the whole thing that people run away from. In relationships, we run away from that stuff. And if we don't heal it, then it just becomes like this, this repetitive thing. Okay. Let me see here. I'm going to go back up. Okay. What work would you recommend to break a codependent toxic relationship? Well, I think this is the beginning of it. They do have that book called Codependent No More. I don't know if anybody's read that. That's a classic in the field. Your dad, so that's my husband. But the thing about it is that first, the work that you first have to do to heal codependency and toxic relationships and all this stuff is you have to first recognize what pattern you are. What pattern did you grow up with? And what pattern, are you? And what relationships have you been attracting? Because you'll start to look at your relationship and you'll see, oh, I'm this type. Okay. And that I always attract these types. Like usually if you're the anxious type of person, then the person you're going to tend to attract is somebody who's more avoidant, right? Who's running, the runner, like they even call it that, the runner, right? And then when the person runs, what happens with the anxious person is they cling more, because what's happening is that they're triggering your abandonment. They're triggering the anxiousness is triggering the abandonment and the neglectfulness that you grew up with. And then for them, they're afraid of losing. That's a fear of loss, a fear of rejection. See? You can see her daughter developing in avoidance style. She is 11. That's a good age to start, talking to her about this stuff and saying, it's okay to feel these emotions. Because what she's trying to do is avoid an emotion, right? You're the runner. You're runner too. What if you have all of the patterns? Yeah. And sometimes you have a mixture of these patterns, and that's called the disorganized pattern. That's a fearful. And it's kind of a combination of both. Yeah. So it means that you grew up with, multiple different things with neglect, abandonment, and rejection. Those are the three things that are triggering these anxious, avoidant, and fearful patterns. When you don't grow up with abandonment, neglect, and rejection from your parents or your caretakers, you have a more secure attachment style. And when somebody who has anxious patterns or avoidant patterns or the fearful pattern, when they meet somebody who has a secure love style, they call it boring. It's going to be boring for you. You could also call these like the bad boy, the bad girl. That's what we're talking about. Bad boy and who grows up like that. Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's the thing. Is whenever you meet somebody who's boring, you might be all three. When you grow up with somebody, when you meet somebody, think about it. When you grow up with somebody or you meet somebody and they're stable, they're comfortable with intimacy, they're open and trusting, they're not trying to go push boundaries and do something crazy and go ride the motorcycles and the fancy cars and they're not trying to push any boundaries or trying to do anything crazy. They're in the line, so to say, like they're not on the fringe of society. They're in the society and they're probably doing something to contribute to society. And they're reliable. That's the biggest word. They're reliable and they're able to commit easily and effortlessly. Those are secure people. That's what a secure attachment style is. And that's actually what is healthy and balanced. And that means that person grew up from the foundations of 0 to 13 in an open, loving, respectful home. Reliable, who's she? And so a lot of times if you're the person who has one of these, if you're anxious or disorganized or an avoidant personality style or attachment style, you're going to meet somebody who's secure and you're going to find it boring. You're not going to find it interesting. You're not going to find that attraction there because it's so foreign from what you grew up with. And so the healing around that is, recognizing where you need to dive deeper into yourself, because it's all about, if you want a nice, loving, healthy, stable relationship, not just intimate relationship, but all relationships, it's really about how you can commit and how much you can commit to that person no matter what, and how open you are to loving that person and trusting that person. And this goes into everything. Just think about so many people I've seen over the years, they always tell me, it's trust that they struggle with. Trust is the number one thing. Trust is like the biggest thing, especially when you're communicating with spirit and you're working with spirit. It's like trust, right? And if you grew up with no trust in an environment that was chaotic and, fearful, and you were abandoned, neglected, or rejected, trust is not going to be something easy for you to do as you get older, because then it creates this thing of like confusion and doubt too. So, hello, Sonia. Welcome in. And I know Sonia has gone to school for this stuff, so she probably talked about it a lot. But I wanted to talk about this foundation stuff because I see it a lot. And I think that the thing about it is that this stuff is also generational. And that's why it's sometimes really hard. And we can talk about the spiritual stuff. We've talked a lot about, doing altar offerings. We've talked about connecting to spirit guides. We talked about meditation. We talk about all this stuff. But if you don't understand the psychological reasons around why your, subconscious is doing this, then it's hard to break those patterns. It's hard to break them within yourself and within your family, because this is generational. And what we're really talking about with this stuff is how you grew up to survive. This is survival energy. When we step into a secure attachment style and we step into our own inner security, then we're no longer in survival mode. And then what you think about it, when you're no longer in survival mode, how much different would your life be? You're not always nervous, you're not always trying to hustle or whatever, like that survival thing. Imagine if that all went away. That's what most anxiety is built upon, is survival. But when you have security and you know yourself and you trust the world, you have a very stable view of not only yourself, but of others. And that's where trust comes from. Because when you have stability within and you're like, oh, I'm stable and oh, I can trust my world around me, then that's trust. That's stability, but it all comes from within. But until we heal those patterns, they always kind of come up at the most inconvenient time when somebody's poking us and triggering us and bringing it out of us. So some of the traits of the anxious partner, which is the one that you see a lot here on the lives that'll come in and ask like about their partner and, and asking if they're going to come back, if they're going to call them, if they're going to text them, because when they're starting to ask that question, they're right in the trigger. And maybe some of you are in that trigger and there's no shame in that. It's just that, it's a trigger. That person is triggering you and you're triggering them. And so the anxious person has a negative and insecure view of themselves. And that's why they're anxious, because they look at the other more positively than themselves. So it's an opposite thing. See, the secure person sees their self as positive and then the outside world as positive. And that's where the trust issue comes in. So they're easy to trust because they have a positive view of self and then they have a positive view of others. But when you have an anxious attachment style, you're going to see kind of negative towards self and positive towards others. And this is kind of dangerous because then it sets you up to set people up on pedestals. So you're always thinking like, oh, this person's better than me. Oh, I'm not that good. And you're kind of always putting yourself down and putting others up, which is very, harsh. It's harsh on self because it's not true. It's not true that you're lower and they're higher. It's a judgment thing. And then, of course, the anxious partner is going to be the one who's always in dependence, who is like the one always needing something, needing someone. And when those people leave or go away, it triggers that abandonment. And then there's the fear of loss, the fear of losing that relationship. And so when you're in a fear of losing a relationship, you will cling on to it. You will text a million times. You'll call all the time. You will stalk. You will, do things out of character because it's all that fear coming through. It's just the fear of losing something or someone. It could be, not just relationship. We form relationships to stuff. Like I've seen hoarders are the same way. They get, real crazy about their stuff. Okay. And then another one is that they worry about being disappointed or abandoned. That's the whole thing. Your husband's like that. Yeah. And then see, the thing about the anxious personality type is that they have a lot of problems with diversity too. Like change might be hard for somebody with an anxious attachment style. Sorry, my cat just got here. Talk about anxious. And also the anxious partner will tend to be the pursuer of the relationship. And so, like I said, the anxious person tends to attract the avoidant, and the avoidant is running and the anxious is pursuing. So when you start healing this, what will happen is that actually the anxious person is there to teach the avoidant, intimacy, that you don't run away, you stay and work it out. And the avoidant person is there to teach the anxious person that they're not going to leave. See, that's when you start healing these relationships, is that the avoidant person, when an avoidant person loves you, because a lot of people are married to avoidant types, right? It's not that avoidants don't commit. But the way you got to think about it, if you have somebody said they have an avoidant husband, is that the person loves you because they're not leaving. Like, that's how you know. They may never say, I love you. Like, avoidant types don't tend to like be real lovey-dovey and, try to, cuddle and stuff. They might not be because they're an avoidant type. But how you know an avoidant loves you is that they stick around. They'll stay with you. They won't leave. That's the whole thing, because the avoidant will always want to leave. And how they leave too sometimes is emotionally. They will emotionally withdraw. They will just, you'll be like, hello, 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 anybody there? And they'll just be they're out. They're gone. They're dazed out. Somebody says I'm describing their husbands. You're the anxious one and the husband is the avoidant. Yeah. It drives you nuts. Your ex was very possessive and not accepting of me being in education. Yeah. Yeah. Because he might have been more the anxious one. And then there's that fear of loss. See, like emotionally check out and shut down. Yeah. Yes. Kim says yes. Yeah. See, this is classic psychology. This is attachment style. I think they should teach this to everybody in like elementary school, because it will make a lot of sense when you get older. But yeah, when you're the avoidant person, you have a positive, unstable view of self. And then you have a negative, insecure view of others. So it's kind of opposite, right? Because the anxious person has the negative, insecure view of self, and then a positive view of others. Whereas the avoidant type has a positive, unstable view of self. So it's positive, but it's not stable. And then they really don't like other people. They don't trust other people. So avoidant types of people will not have a big circle. They will have a very small circle because they don't trust people very easily. Like they really don't trust at all. And an avoidant type of person is easy to cut people off, whereas an anxious type person is not. They will keep friendships, they will keep relationships longer sometimes than they should, because it triggers their fear of loss, a fear of abandonment. But with an avoidant person, the whole thing is like they will reject you before you reject them, because their whole thing is a fear of rejection. And when they reject somebody, it gives them more power and control than when somebody else rejects them. Understand? And that's what they call ghosting. So a lot of the people who ghost, if you've ever been ghosted or you're the ghoster, it's because of that. It's a fear of rejection, usually. Because like if you're healthy and you're secure, you handle rejection well. And you will actually be okay rejecting others and having them reject you. That's a normal thing. But a lot of times we're running away from those painful things because when we were children, we never fully expressed them. We never felt them. We never connected to them. We never had the opportunity to fully heal and understand, abandonment, neglect, and rejection. And those are the things we really struggle with in adulthood. And this is not just in romantic relationships. This is also in business. If you can't handle abandonment, neglect, and rejection, it's very hard to have a business, because those are the three things you're going to constantly and consistently have to deal with in your business, is those three concepts. And so this is why I said like children should learn this, because it also affects your wealth and your finances and your money and your relationships, because everything in this world is built around relationships. As an independent artist, oh my God, so true. Yeah, because, change the word independent, go to interdependent, because the independent thing in business is kind of hard, because you can't be independent. You're always going to have connections and a social network. You have to have a social network to even have a business. And so that's an avoidant type. When you're an avoidant type, you're going to want to do everything on your own. Independent. You're independent. You're self-reliant. Avoidant type of people hate asking for help. You're never, that's you. So uncomfortable. I know. And this all comes from early childhood trauma, because when you're a child, if you grew up with a very critical home, in a critical home where you couldn't speak your voice, then you had to learn how to do everything on your own. And that became your style. That became your thing. And yeah, you hate it to ask for help. Yeah. And then this is where the healing comes from, is now as an adult, you're going to be forced to ask for help. You're going to have to ask for help. And it's going to be very uncomfortable until it becomes comfortable, because that's the healing. That's the healing. That's the healing. The healing is that you have to do the opposite of what you grew up in. So if you were taught to be very independent, self-reliant, don't ask for help, suck it up, then you have to now say, oh, okay, that wasn't serving me. And you start healing that, and you start asking for help little by little, doing small steps at a time, and then becoming comfortable and trusting in others, because that's where the avoidant type really suffers, is, with trusting others. You got a side eye always. Right? Because you're also not going to be relying on others too. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's exactly right, Kelly. Doing gratitude lists helps in healing when asked for help. Yeah. Gratitude is everything. Everything. Gratitude heals everything. It's one of the highest vibrations. It's love in action. It's being really grateful for what you have and not always wanting more. As an avoidant, what is the attraction to narcissist? The avoidant type withdraws, right? And I think more than anything, when you're talking about narcissism, because what a narcissist is really attracted to is someone who will give them what they want. So what we're really talking about with narcissists, and where you have to really be really careful with narcissists, is boundaries. Because all of these attachment styles, unless you're a secure attachment style, suffers with boundaries. And so you have to think about it, because if you're the fearful or disorganized kind, you may set a boundary, but then you won't hold the boundary. You'll easily, let it go. Oh, well, this time, that kind of thing. That's the main thing with a narcissist. When you're dealing with a narcissist, my cat, when you're dealing with a narcissist, it's about boundaries, because that's what they want, and attention. And it's all about control. I think spirit is forcing me to, because now I have disabilities and can't do everything yourself anymore. Yeah. See, and that's how it goes, is that when you have to heal these patterns, everything will make it happen. So you have to. And then when you start asking for help, if you're the independent avoidant type, and you start asking for help and you receive it, and you start getting positive, conditions, like positive affirmations, or what do they call that? Positive rewards. Then you start retraining those neural pathways in your brain, and you start, feeling comfortable with asking for help, and it doesn't become a scary or uncomfortable thing anymore. In the beginning, it's very scary. It's very hard. It's going to be like totally out of your comfort zone. But as you continuously ask for help and you get that positive reinforcement, that's what I was thinking of. When you get the positive reinforcement, then it starts rewiring those pathways in your brain. 18 years of, oh, I'll let it slide this time. Yeah, the boundaries thing. Don't let it slide. Don't let it slide. Because you know what will happen if you're with a narcissist and then you start holding a boundary? They will quickly lose interest. They'll quickly lose interest. Because now they can't control you. Now they can't get to you. Now they can't trigger you. And now they're going to have to respect you, which they don't want to do. Because of the narcissist, they always see things differently. They always see, like, they want all eyes on them. That's what the whole thing of narcissism is, or what we call selfishness. Selfishness is all about, you. And if you're not getting the attention, then they'll go somewhere else to get it. Yeah. And the thing about an avoidant type is that they are really good with boundaries, but they're too rigid with boundaries, usually. This is the type where they will put up a million walls, and those walls are rock solid. Oops. Peaky agrees. So those walls are just like rock solid, and it's hard to get through them. And that's the avoidant type. And they're obviously seeking distance and avoiding attachment, which I think is always funny because then they go for the person who wants the attachment, which is the anxious type. Those two always go together. And that's why it's the yin yang, it's the push pull, it's the this. They're always constantly pushing and pulling. And I think in the new age, they call it the twin flame. That's what twin flame is, because they're ultimately there to heal. And it's the exact opposite of you to the extreme that you need. So if you're a lot anxious, you're going to attract somebody who's very avoidant. And if you're very avoidant, you're going to attract somebody who's very anxious. And those two always end up together. Oh, you want to give gratitude to Spirit for leading me to you. I asked them for help and came across you. Oh, I'm so glad you came here to the real Slim Shelley. I like your name. Yeah. And that's how it goes. Like this weekend, I was going through my notes from when I was in college and I was doing psychology work. And I was like, this is the stuff that spiritual people don't really talk a lot about. I think they're now starting to, but this is basic psychology 101. This is the stuff that you learn early on in psychology because it becomes like the whole branch of psychology of why we attract the people we attract and the dysfunction around it and how it relates to early childhood trauma. That's really huge work just to recognize it. And most people aren't even looking at that or thinking about it, because what we tend to do in relationships is just think it's, that person's fault, or, like we always point the finger outwards instead of looking in here and saying, why is it that I always track this person? Why is it that I always get this way? Why am I always left feeling? Because you'll definitely know the feeling that it feels. You know the feeling of it. What about when I get positive feedback, I don't believe them? That's because you have a negative self-view. That's the thing. If you are somebody who doesn't easily receive, I think there's going to be like a light bulb moment for somebody here. If you can't receive, like you can't receive a compliment, it's hard for you to receive money, it's hard for you to receive gifts. When you're just somebody who doesn't receive well, it's because you have a negative self-view of yourself and you don't believe you're worthy of that. And so you tend to put people on a pedestal, and that's the anxious type, is a person who thinks negative of themselves but positive of others. So you'll see those positive attributes. And a lot of times with the anxious people, what I notice is that they will tend to, want to give more in a relationship to somebody who is giving less. Make sense? Whereas like when you're anxious and you're trying, because you're giving out of people pleasing, you're not really giving to give. It's not really a true gift because you're giving to get something. You're giving because in your early childhood, you learned that when you give something, you get love. That's how your parents or caretakers expressed it. It's like, oh, okay. You almost have to self-sacrifice yourself to make the other person happy, because probably your parent or caretaker was miserable and you were trying to do everything you could to make them feel better. But the problem with that was that nothing worked. Nothing worked. And then that's when you have to heal, and you just have to say, and sometimes people have to cut their parents off because they're so toxic, or the relationship is so toxic, or they have to take a break from it. Because when you get older, you start to understand that I have to be happy. That's the light bulb moment, is like, I have to be happy. Why am I self-sacrificing my needs, my wants, my future, my, whatever, to make somebody who's always miserable, that you're never gonna satisfy them. It's like people pleasing is a result of somebody trying to help somebody who's unhelpable, basically. And that's the hard reality of it. That's the healing part of it. And that's why it's hard to confront these things, because it does take the inner work to know that you didn't do anything wrong. It was just your childhood traumas that you've been trying to cope with, but never had an opportunity to really heal, because we live in a very dysfunctional society where we don't talk about this stuff unless you go to, school or come across TikTok or something. Okay. Oh, you're welcome, Sammy. People pleasing is so exhausting for your mental health. Yeah. And the thing about people pleasing is that it'll lead you to a whole life of unfulfilled wants, because you will always be constantly trying to please somebody else. And the unfortunate thing is that people pleasers always pick the people who are never pleased. It's like the people that you're trying to please, they're not pleasable. They're not ever going to be pleased no matter what you do. You could bend over backwards and they'll still complain. You could, sell everything you own and give them every penny you have, and they'll be like, is that all? You know what I mean? It's like they'll never get there. So the earlier you can learn not to do that, the better. And depending on whatever style you are, it's it can be sometimes a lifelong pursuit, but it's worth it. And you may never get to 100% secure. I mean, there's very few people who are 100% secure. The most secure people I have ever met are from backgrounds outside of our culture. So, they're not from here. Like, I work a lot with the Buddhist monks. They're very secure. But in order to get there, they had to renounce their whole life. They had to renounce family, renounce, everything of our culture to just 100% focus on meditation, prayer, and self and initiations, right? Whereas, other people in our society, we're juggling with all this stuff. You have to even just give yourself credit for even attempting to do this kind of work and working on yourself and daring to be in relationships and healing, because it's not easy work, because people will trigger you. They'll trigger you. And if you're able to stick through it and heal with that person, then you'll have a much better relationship. And sometimes that takes years of work to get to. That's my husband. Nothing is never enough for him. Yeah. That's a lot of people's husband, right? And wives, because we live in a culture that is very ungrateful. We're not grateful for what we have, and it's a consumerist culture. That's why. So we have to, understand that and have compassion for that, but also do the work for ourselves so that we can be personally happy, because all these triggers and all these early stuff that we grew up with, it sets us up for unhappiness. If you're constantly pleasing others at the sacrifice of self, that's unhappiness. If you are an avoidant person, it's usually very lonely because it's hard to let somebody in, right? Yeah. Are you offering any workshops, retreats? Yeah, I have private sessions right now, what I'm offering, but later I'm going to be putting all this together and offering some classes this summer. I've been working on different stuff, but I'm always available for private consultations, but I will be offering more workshops and classes. I was taking a break this winter. You're trying to heal so you can hear spirit's voice, improve but still learn. Well, that's the thing, is you just keep doing it. Don't give up. It's a slow but rewarding process. It's a slow but rewarding process. If I avoid confrontation, how can I face the confrontation? The thing about that is that when confrontation comes, you have to build up courage to face it, right? And that takes practice. So the first thing, if you're an avoidant person, and the avoidant personality is really like, I just want to be left alone, because early on in your life, people were constantly bothering you. It was chaotic. It was confusing. Maybe, a lot of people with big homes or a lot of trauma in the home. there's something about the home that was so loud and chaotic that now as an adult, you just want to be left alone. That's the avoidant type. It's just, I want to be left alone, the hermit. But then at the same time, you're a human and humans have needs. And one of our main needs is companionship, right? It's to heal the loneliness. And so the biggest thing for an avoidant type of person is to trust. This is the hardest part with avoidancy, is that it's hard to trust the world. It's hard to trust another. Trust was broken very easily or very, very early on. And so the whole healing journey for you is about, okay, well, I need to learn to trust again. And I need to know that when I ask for help or when there's this, confrontation or there's this challenge, instead of running, I have to face it. I have to gather my courage and strength and speak my truth and face the possibility of rejection and loss. Because that's actually what your ego and the inner child is running away from, is rejection and loss. And if you know that, it kind of, consciously, then when challenge comes up, you can remind yourself, okay, my pattern is to run, but I'm not going to run. I'm going to face it. And when you face it, what happens is that you'll see it wasn't so bad. It's not so bad. We make fear out to be this huge monster. And then when we face it, we always find, oh, it's not so bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought. And then the next time, now you've done a whole new pathway in your brain. Now your brain is like, oh, remember, it wasn't so bad. I'll do it again and again and again and again. And the more repetition you do, it's like building a muscle. And now you have a new pathway in your brain, and it's healed that old pathway, because it's all like kind of connected. Your brain, your thoughts, feelings, and actions are all connected. But the problem is that when we get stuck in one of these patterns, we just run back to the pattern because it's all we know. And in order to create a new pattern, you have to do the opposite of what you would normally do. So I hope that helps. Do the opposite of what you normally do. If you normally run, you stay and you work it out. You figure it out. You talk. You express yourself. And if you are an anxious person and you're with an avoidant person, you have to understand that trigger for that person. That trigger for that person is fear of loss and rejection. So it's not you. That's the biggest thing you have to know. It's not you. When they're running, it's not because you did something, unless you did something. If you lied and cheated and did something terrible, then that's different. But like if it's something small and it's something you keep running up into and you want to talk and they want to run, then you understand there's the trigger there. The trigger is something in there. It's that fear of intimacy. And then it's about working it out so that they can open, creating that safe and open place for the partner to express themselves. And that doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen when you are able to really sit and understand what triggers that person, what triggers you, and where's the common ground, right? And, like the avoidant person will trigger that anxious person when they don't call them back right away, or when they don't text them, or when they leave and don't tell them where they're going. Now the anxious person is all triggered up, because now they don't know, like, oh my God, are they coming back? It's going to trigger that old childhood wound. And so the avoidant person, when they understand that about their person, then they'll make sure they're going to call them. They're going to text them. They're going to say, I'm just leaving for a little while. Okay. They will understand that, because when you're with somebody you love and you want to work it out, you have to understand what triggers and what moves that person so that you can find an easy and, more harmonious communication style and flow to it, and not, every time the person leaves, you just think they're abandoning you. or the avoidant person, every time they leave, they don't want to talk about it. They just pull their walls up. Their boundaries are all over the place, right? So this is the stuff about relationships, is they're complex and they take a lot of work and they take time to understand these foundations of when we grew up. What did they grow up with? And that's why, in my culture, I always say your ancestors the ancestors of the person you're going to marry is very important. That's, and that's why in most ancient cultures, they did arranged marriages and they really checked out the family before they married in, because they understood these things are generational and they understood that they're passed down. These are also passed down through the blood. And when we understand, these things better, then we might think about, before we marry these people, like, what we're getting into. Is it really worth my time and energy? And am I going to be able to make it in the long run? But in this day and age, a lot of relationships are more built on lust, and chemistry. And the hard thing about this is that the more attracted you are to somebody, those intense, like, sexual attractions tend to be from these dysfunctions, because the more secure you are, and if, like, you're both really secure, you may have really good attraction and it's going to be like more friendship and it's going to be more for the long run, but it's not going to be that crazy, overwhelming, energy. That's how the universe set it up. Don't shoot the messenger, but that's usually how it goes. And that's why you see these really intense energies, like when two people who are really, like, intensely drawn together, like what they call love at first sight, it usually burns out very quickly. It'll burn out. It's not going to be for the long run. The relationships that are for the long run are more secure relationships built on friendship. And, all those boxes are met. So when we think about life and you think about what kind of life you want to live, you always want to think about balance. Where's the balance in this relationship? Where's the balance in my life? And how can I heal these triggers, these early childhood triggers, so that I can have the best relationships, the best business, the best health, the best family that I possibly can. And of course, nobody's life is perfect, and, it never will be. But what we can strive towards is what we call balance and harmony. It's weird because when I experience emotional, psychological pain, it causes me physical pain. Yeah, that's all, it's all connected. You see, the thing about it, in our world, we're taught that our head is different than our body. And yet our body and our head are connected. And then we're also taught, like, our mind is separate from our feelings, but they're also connected. However, the distance between your mind and your heart can be sometimes miles and miles and miles away. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I hope you have a really great week. And I'll be back next Monday, 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I'm going to do some videos this week on this full moon that's coming up. But I invite you to think about everything we talked about, and, just think about it in your own life and your relationships. And if you want to watch the replay, it is on YouTube. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Many blessings.